The photograph was discovered in the summer of 1967, tucked away in a forgotten cedar chest in the attic of the Blackwood family home in Harlan County, Kentucky. The paper had yellowed at the edges, but the image remained remarkably crisp. A family of 5 standing stiffly before their modest cabin in the shadow of the Appalachian Mountains. Thomas Blackwood, a coal miner with calloused hands and a stern expression, stood beside his wife, Eliza, who wore her Sunday best, despite the visible exhaustion in her eyes. Their 3 children, James, Sarah, and the youngest, Emma, barely 6 years old, were arranged in descending height before them. It was an unremarkable portrait, similar to countless others taken throughout the mining communities of eastern Kentucky in the late 1800s. The family patriarch, the dutiful wife, the solemn children who had learned stillness before they learned to smile for a camera. Nothing about it would have warranted a second glance, except for what Joseph Caldwell, the great-grandson of Thomas, noticed when cleaning out his deceased mother's house that summer day. Behind Emma's left shoulder, partially obscured by shadow, was a 6th figure. At first, Joseph assumed it was a smudge on the photograph or perhaps a trick of the light, a dark blur where the forest began behind the family homestead. But as he tilted the photograph toward the attic's single window, the shape resolved itself into something unmistakably human. A tall, gaunt figure standing just beyond the family circle, its features obscured by what appeared to be a veil or shroud, with only the suggestion of eyes visible within the darkness. The family never mentioned a 6th person, Joseph would later tell Dr. Eleanor Hayes, the folklorist who first documented the Blackwood case in 1968. Not in any of the stories my grandmother told, not in any family record. But there it was, clear as day once you knew to look for it. And the strangest thing was how nobody in the photo seemed to notice it standing there, just inches away from little Emma. The photograph was dated October 17, 1891, exactly 3 weeks before the Blackwood mine collapse that would claim the lives of 13 men, including Thomas Blackwood. The Appalachian Mountains have long been a repository of America's forgotten histories, their ancient ridges and valleys concealing stories that mainstream chronicles preferred to ignore. In the late 19th century, as industrial capitalism pushed deeper into these isolated communities, it brought not only the crushing machinery of progress, but also new ways of seeing and recording life. Photography, once a luxury of the wealthy, became increasingly accessible, allowing families like the Blackwoods to preserve their likenesses for posterity. Yet these same images sometimes captured more than their subjects intended. Records indicate that in the decades following the Civil War, mining accidents in Harlan County claimed over 200 lives. The Blackwood mine collapse of November 7, 1891, was particularly devastating, not only for its death toll, but for what survivors described as its inexplicable nature. According to testimony given to the mining company's investigators, there had been no warning signs of structural instability in the shaft where the collapse occurred. One survivor, Michael Donovan, described how the mountain just seemed to swallow them up, like it had been waiting to do so. In the aftermath, as widows mourned and children faced futures without fathers, the mining company quickly settled with the affected families, paying out small sums that barely covered funeral expenses. The Blackwoods received $42, equivalent to about 3 months of Thomas's wages, and were permitted to remain in their company-owned cabin for 6 additional months before being evicted to make room for a new mining family. What makes the Blackwood photograph particularly unsettling is not merely the presence of the unexplained figure, but what happened to Emma Blackwood in the years that followed. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel. Subscribe now to experience more historical mysteries that challenge our understanding of reality and remind us that history's shadows sometimes take human form. According to parish records from the Methodist Church in nearby Cumberland, Emma began speaking of the tall friend shortly after her father's death. Reverend George Stilwell's journal, preserved in the Kentucky Historical Society archives, notes with concern how the young girl would converse with an unseen presence, particularly during the bitter winter months when the family struggled to survive on Eliza's meager earnings as a washerwoman. Mrs. Blackwood came to me in distress today, reads the entry from January 23, 1892. The child Emma speaks continuously to someone she calls the Watcher. When questioned, she says it is the same friend who stood with them for the photograph last fall. Mrs. Blackwood fears for the child's reason, though I suspect grief takes many forms, especially in one so young. By spring, as the family prepared for their forced relocation, Emma's behavior grew increasingly concerning. She would wake screaming in the night, claiming that the Watcher had shown her the dark place where father went. More disturbing were the accurate details she provided about the mine collapse, details she could not possibly have known, as no child had been permitted near the disaster site, and her mother had been careful not to discuss the traumatic specifics around her children. Emma says the mountain got hungry, Reverend Stillwell wrote. She says it takes a man every generation, and it would have taken James if father hadn't gone instead. When I asked how she knows these things, she only says, "The Watcher tells me. The Watcher has always been with our family." On April 17, 1892, exactly 6 months after the photograph was taken, Emma Blackwood disappeared. The child had gone to collect kindling in the woods behind the cabin, a daily chore she had performed without incident for months. When she failed to return by dusk, Eliza alerted neighbors, and a search party was formed. For 3 days, miners and townspeople combed the surrounding forest, calling Emma's name until their voices grew hoarse. On the 4th day, as hope began to fade, 13-year-old James Blackwood made a discovery that would haunt the community for decades. In a small clearing half a mile from the cabin, he found Emma's apron hanging from a tree branch. Beneath it, pressed into the soft spring earth, was a single adult footprint, too large to belong to his sister, too narrow to match any of the searchers' boots. No other trace of Emma Blackwood was ever found. The disappearance of Emma Blackwood might have remained nothing more than a tragic footnote in Harlan County's history, one more sorrow in a place already acquainted with grief, had it not been for what happened exactly 7 years later, on April 17, 1899. James Blackwood, by then a young man of 20, had followed his father's footsteps into the mines despite his mother's tearful protests. Like many in Appalachia, he had few options beyond extracting the coal that had already claimed his father, and in some indefinable way his sister as well. That particular evening, he was returning home after a 14-hour shift, taking his usual shortcut through the woods where Emma had vanished. What happened next was documented in a sworn affidavit to Sheriff William Corbin, preserved in county records and later transcribed by Dr. Hayes in her research. "I was bone-tired and not paying much mind to my surroundings," James testified. "The sun was almost gone, just enough light to see the path. That's when I heard someone singing. A child's voice, singing that lullaby Ma used to sing to Emma. I called out, thinking some child from town had wandered too far, but the singing stopped immediately. I followed where the sound had come from and reached that same clearing where we found Emma's apron years before. Standing in the center was a girl, maybe 13 or 14 years old, wearing a white dress that seemed to glow in the dim light. I couldn't make out her face clearly, but something in how she stood made my heart stop. 'Emma!' I called, though I knew it couldn't be. She'd be the same age as this girl if she'd lived, but Emma was gone. The girl didn't answer, just raised her hand and pointed behind me. I turned, God help me, and there it was, the same tall figure from our family portrait, standing at the edge of the clearing. I couldn't see a face, just darkness where a face should be. I ran. I ran until my lungs burned, never looking back. When I reached town, I went straight to Ma and told her what I'd seen. She went white as a sheet and showed me something she'd kept hidden all these years. A page torn from Pa's journal where he'd written about seeing a tall, dark figure watching our cabin for weeks before the mine collapse. He'd thought it was a company man, maybe, keeping tabs on miners suspected of Union sympathies, but he wrote that when he approached it one evening, it vanished before his eyes, leaving only a cold spot in the air. 3 days after this encounter, James Blackwood was found dead at the bottom of mine shaft number 7, a shaft that had been closed for years following a minor collapse. His neck was broken, consistent with a fall from height. However, no explanation was ever provided for how or why the young man had entered an abandoned shaft, nor why his boots contained soil that geological analysis would later confirm did not match any composition found within the mine itself. The soil, according to records from the company's reluctant investigation, most closely resembled that found in the clearing where Emma's apron had been discovered 7 years earlier. Eliza Blackwood, having now lost her husband and both of her older children to the mountain, took her remaining daughter Sarah and fled Harlan County the following day. They resettled in Cincinnati, Ohio, where Eliza found work in a textile mill and steadfastly refused to speak of Kentucky or the tragedies that had befallen her family there. According to Sarah's descendants, Eliza burned all family photographs before leaving, all except the portrait containing the mysterious figure, which she sealed in a tin box and buried beneath the floorboards of their cabin. The Blackwood property remained abandoned for nearly 2 decades. Local children dared each other to approach the deteriorating structure, telling stories of a tall shadow that could sometimes be seen moving behind the cracked windows. In 1917, when the mining company attempted to demolish the cabin to make way for expanded operations, 2 workers reported seeing a child in a white dress standing on the porch at dusk. When they approached, they said, the girl pointed toward the woods before vanishing before their eyes. The demolition was halted when one of the workers uncovered the tin box containing the photograph while tearing up the floorboards. The man, Joseph Miller, became so disturbed upon examining the image that he refused to return to the site. The half-demolished cabin remained that way for years, neither fully destroyed nor inhabited, a physical manifestation of a story without resolution. Throughout the early 20th century, the Blackwood case might have faded from local memory had it not been for a curious pattern that began to emerge. Every 7 years, on or near April 17th, someone in Harlan County would report an encounter with either a girl in a white dress or a tall, faceless figure, sometimes both together. These sightings typically occurred near the abandoned Blackwood property or the clearing in the woods, which locals had come to call Emma's Place. In 1927, a coal company surveyor named Richard Tanner disappeared while taking measurements near the old Blackwood mine. His equipment was found neatly arranged at the edge of Emma's Place, alongside a single adult footprint that investigators noted was unusually narrow and deep, as if made by someone of considerable weight stepping very precisely. 7 years later, in 1934, during the height of labor unrest in Harlan County, union organizer Martin Collins reported being led away from a company ambush by a young girl who appeared from nowhere and knew paths through the woods I'd never seen before. Collins claimed the girl had saved him and 5 other union men from certain death, leading them to safety before pointing to a tall figure watching from a ridge and saying, "The mountain remembers who takes care of it and who it takes in return." Each incident, each disappearance or mysterious salvation added to the growing folklore surrounding the Blackwood family and the entities that seemed to remain connected to them long after they had left Harlan County. Yet without the photograph as evidence, these might have remained nothing more than the kind of ghost stories common throughout Appalachia. Tales told to explain the inexplicable in a landscape where the boundary between the living and the dead has always seemed particularly thin. The Blackwood photograph might have remained buried in obscurity had Joseph Caldwell not discovered it during that summer cleaning in 1967. As the Vietnam War raged and social upheaval transformed American society, this relic of an earlier tragedy found its way into the hands of Dr. Eleanor Hayes, a folklorist at the University of Kentucky who had been documenting Appalachian ghost stories and legends for over a decade. Hayes's initial reaction to the photograph was skeptical. In her field journal, she wrote, "The image is certainly unsettling, but could easily be explained as a photographic anomaly, a double exposure perhaps, or simply a person who was standing with the family but whom history forgot." Rural Appalachian communities often included individuals who existed on the margins of official records. But as she began interviewing elderly residents of Harlan County, Hayes discovered that the legend of the Blackwood family and their shadowy watcher had persisted across generations. More troubling were the consistent details that emerged across disparate accounts: the 7-year cycle of appearances, the clearing in the woods, the connection to the mines. One interview subject, Harriet Jenkins, age 89 in 1968, recalled, "My father was one of the men who searched for little Emma. He never spoke of it until his dying day, when the fever took him in 31. He said they'd found something in that clearing that none of them could explain, not just the apron and the footprint the official report mentioned, but a circle of stones that hadn't been there the day before, each one marked with a symbol nobody recognized. Inside the circle, nothing would grow. No grass, no weeds, nothing. just bare earth that stayed soft even in drought. Another elderly resident, former miner Samuel Pritchard, told Hayes, "There's always been something not right about that part of the mountain. The old-timers, the ones who were here before the mining companies, they wouldn't go near it. The Cherokee had stories about it being a thin place, somewhere the spirit world touches ours." After what happened to the Blackwoods, most folks gave it a wide berth. The company tried to open a new shaft near there in 2006, but 3 surveyors died in 3 days, each found with their eyes wide open and their mouths filled with coal dust, though none had been in the mines. What do you think was watching the Blackwood family in that photograph? Leave a comment saying, "The mountain remembers," if you've ever felt an unexplainable presence in an old photograph. Hayes' investigation took an unexpected turn when she tracked down Miriam Blackwood, Sarah's daughter and Emma's niece, living in a nursing home in Cincinnati. Miriam, then in her 70s, initially refused to speak about her family's history in Kentucky. It was only after Hayes showed her the photograph that the elderly woman's resistance crumbled. "Mother never talked about Harlan County," Miriam told Hayes, "but grandmother, Eliza, she would sometimes whisper things when the laudanum took hold of her near the end. She said the mountain had made a deal with my grandfather's grandfather when he first settled that land in the 1820s. The soil was supposed to be poor there. Nothing would grow right, but William Blackwood's crops flourished while his neighbors starved." According to Miriam, family lore held that William had encountered something ancient in the woods one desperate winter, something that offered prosperity in exchange for periodic tribute. Grandmother said every 3rd generation the mountain took someone from the family. Always had, always would, until the Blackwood line ended. That's why she made Mother promise never to have children. But Mother defied her when she married my father. Most disturbing was what Miriam revealed about her own life. "I was 13 when I first saw the Watcher, the same age Emma would have been when she disappeared. It was 1927, exactly 35 years after Emma was taken. I was walking home from school in Cincinnati, over 1,000 miles from Kentucky, and saw a reflection in a shop window, someone tall standing behind me. When I turned, there was nothing there, but I felt cold, so cold. That night, a girl in a white dress stood at the foot of my bed. Her face, it was like looking in a mirror, though I'd never seen a photograph of Emma. She didn't speak, just pointed toward my window, where I could see the tall figure watching from the street below. After that, they came every night for a week. Mother found me sleepwalking, trying to leave the house. She knew somehow what was happening. The next day, she took me to a Romani woman who lived on the outskirts of town, who performed some kind of ritual and gave me this." Miriam showed Hayes a small leather pouch worn around her neck. Inside was a mixture of herbs, graveyard dirt, and coal dust, along with a tarnished silver coin bearing unfamiliar markings. The woman said it would hide me from the Watcher's sight, and it worked. I never saw the figures again. But I still dream of the mountain. In the dreams, I'm always walking toward a dark opening in the earth, and I can hear my Aunt Emma singing somewhere deep inside. Hayes might have dismissed Miriam's account as the product of family trauma and superstition had April 17, 1969, not arrived during her research. True to the pattern, a sighting was reported, this time by Hayes herself. In her field journal, the folklorist described visiting the site of the former Blackwood cabin at dusk. The area had been largely abandoned after the mine played out in the 1950s, the company town slowly reverting to forest as operations moved elsewhere. As she took photographs of the foundation stones that were all that remained of the cabin, Hayes reported feeling a sudden, unnatural chill, though the evening was mild for April. When she developed her photographs days later, Hayes was startled to find that in one image, and only one, a tall, dark figure could be seen standing among the trees at the edge of the clearing. The proportions were wrong somehow, the limbs too long, the torso too narrow. Where the face should have been was only a dark void. On the back of the photograph, Hayes wrote with an uncharacteristically shaky hand, "It was watching me the entire time." The scientific investigation of the Blackwood case began in earnest in 1972, when Dr. Hayes reluctantly shared her findings with Dr. Martin Schaefer, a psychology professor specializing in collective trauma and community-based folklore. Schaefer, initially skeptical, was intrigued by the consistency of the 7-year cycle and the photographic evidence from both 1891 and 1969. "What we're likely observing," he wrote in his preliminary analysis, "is the crystallization of community trauma into folklore. The mining disasters that plagued Harlan County created a psychological environment where supernatural explanation provided meaning for seemingly random tragedy. The Blackwood family, having suffered disproportionate losses, became the focal point for this narrative formation." Schaefer proposed that the original photograph contained either a photographer's assistant or simply another family member who had been forgotten over time. The subsequent sightings and disappearances, he suggested, could be explained by a combination of suggestion, environmental factors particular to the geography of the region, and the documented phenomenon of traumatic reenactment. To test his theory, Schaefer assembled a research team to conduct a thorough investigation of the area around the former Blackwood property. Their work coincided, perhaps unfortunately, with April 1976, 7 years after Hayes's encounter. The expedition included Schaefer, his graduate assistant Rebecca Chen, geologist Dr. William Foster, and 2 local guides familiar with the increasingly overgrown terrain. They arrived in Harlan County on April 15th and established a base camp near the former mining community, now little more than a ghost town with a few stubborn residents who had refused the company's relocation offers when the mine closed. Their first 2 days were spent gathering baseline measurements, soil samples, atmospheric readings, electromagnetic field strengths, and detailed mapping of the area. Foster noted several geological anomalies, including unusually high concentrations of rare earth elements in soil samples taken from Emma's Place, and what he described as acoustic peculiarities in the cave systems that networked beneath the mountain. "Sound doesn't travel as expected in these passages," Foster wrote in his field notes. "There are dead zones where all noise simply stops, and other areas where even a whisper creates overlapping echoes that sound disturbingly like human voices conversing just around the next bend." On the evening of April 17th, the team set up observation equipment in 3 locations: the foundation of the Blackwood cabin, the clearing known as Emma's Place, and the sealed entrance to the collapsed mine where Thomas Blackwood had died. Each location was monitored by video and audio recorders, temperature sensors, and electromagnetic field detectors. The team members stationed themselves to maintain visual contact with at least one other person at all times. What happened over the next 12 hours has been debated in academic circles ever since. According to the surviving equipment records and testimony from Schaefer and the 2 guides, at precisely 11:42 p.m., all 3 monitoring stations registered a sudden temperature drop of approximately 15 degrees Fahrenheit. This was followed by electromagnetic spikes that caused temporary equipment malfunctions. When the systems came back online 3 minutes later, the audio recorders at Emma's Place were picking up what sound analysis would later confirm as a child's voice singing a traditional Appalachian lullaby. Rebecca Chen, who was monitoring that station, radioed that she could see a female figure in white moving at the edge of the clearing. Against protocol, she left her position to investigate, maintaining radio contact as she did so. "It's a young girl," her final transmission stated. "She's beckoning me to follow her toward the old mine entrance. Wait, there's someone else here. Something tall standing behind her. I can't make out any features. It's too dark where its face should be." The transmission ended with a burst of static. By the time Schaefer and one of the guides reached the clearing, Chen was nowhere to be found. The video equipment had captured only a few frames of what appeared to be a child in white at the edge of the camera's range before failing completely. The ensuing search lasted 5 days and involved local law enforcement, wilderness rescue teams, and eventually FBI agents specializing in missing persons cases. No trace of Rebecca Chen was discovered apart from her radio, found in the center of Emma's Place alongside a single adult footprint that several officers noted was unusually narrow and deep. Dr. Foster, who had been monitoring the mine entrance when Chen disappeared, reported his own disturbing experience. "Around the same time Rebecca's signal was lost, I observed what I can only describe as a localized failure of light around the sealed mine entrance. It wasn't simply darkness, It was as if that particular section of space was absorbing all illumination directed at it. Within this darkness, I perceived movement and what seemed to be extremely tall humanoid silhouettes. As a scientist, I'm hesitant to use this terminology, but they appeared to be emerging from the sealed entrance, as if the rock face had become permeable. Foster's equipment recorded significant seismic activity during this period, though no earthquakes were reported in the region. More puzzling were the audio recordings, which captured what sound analysts described as layered vocalizations that didn't match any known animal species. When digitally separated, the sounds resolved into what seemed to be multiple human voices speaking simultaneously in different pitches and rhythms. Linguistic analysis of these recordings yielded inconclusive results, though two experts independently identified phonetic patterns consistent with an archaic dialect of Cherokee mixed with something they could not identify. One linguist noted that certain vocal patterns seemed to employ sounds physically impossible for the human vocal apparatus to produce. The FBI investigation officially classified Rebecca Chen as a missing person, likely the victim of a fall in the hazardous abandoned mining area. Her body was never recovered, and the case remains technically open, though active investigation ended after 3 months. Schaefer, deeply affected by his student's disappearance, spent the next 2 years compiling all available data on the Blackwood case before publishing his controversial paper, Temporal Recurrence Patterns in Appalachian Folk Narratives, The Blackwood Anomaly, in 1978. The paper represented a stark departure from his initial skepticism. While I cannot and do not claim supernatural causation, Schaefer wrote in his conclusion, I am compelled by the evidence to acknowledge that conventional explanatory frameworks are insufficient to account for all aspects of this case. The consistent 7-year cycle of manifestations, the photographic evidence spanning generations, and the geological and acoustic anomalies of the region suggest a phenomenon that exists at the intersection of physical, psychological, and potentially cultural dimensions we do not yet fully understand. The academic community largely dismissed Schaefer's work, attributing his conclusions to grief and guilt over Chen's disappearance. His reputation suffered, his tenure was denied, and he eventually left academia entirely. His final known communication was a letter to Dr. Hayes in 1982, in which he wrote, April 17, 1983, will mark the next 7-year point. I intend to return to Harlan County, not as an investigator this time, but as a participant. If what I now suspect is true, Rebecca isn't gone. She's simply somewhere else, somewhere the Blackwoods have always known about, somewhere beyond what we're willing to see. Martin Schaefer was reported missing on April 18, 1983. His car was found parked near the overgrown path leading to the former Blackwood property. Inside was a copy of the original family photograph and a journal containing increasingly erratic entries detailing his conviction that the Blackwood case represented evidence of permeable boundaries between worlds that occasionally align, allowing passage between them. The final entry, dated April 17th, read simply, The mountain is calling. I think I've always heard it. By the early 1990s, the Blackwood case had become a minor footnote in paranormal research circles, occasionally mentioned in books about Appalachian folklore or discussed on early internet message boards dedicated to unexplained phenomena. The 7-year cycle continued to yield reports. A local teenager claimed to have seen a girl in white and a tall shadow while hiking in 1990, while in 1997, a geology student conducting field research in the area disappeared for 3 days before being found wandering on a road 20 miles away, unable or unwilling to account for the missing time. But it was the digital age that would breathe new life into the mystery, beginning in 2004 when Joseph Caldwell's grandson, Michael, scanned the original Blackwood photograph and posted it to several paranormal investigation websites. The image quickly spread across the internet, subjected to countless analyses and enhancements that only seemed to deepen the mystery of the figure behind the family. Digital enhancement revealed details previously invisible to the naked eye. The figure's clothing appeared to be not fabric, but rather a kind of membrane that connected to the surrounding shadows. More disturbing was the suggestion of a face within the darkness, not human features, but rather a pattern of lighter areas that, when viewed as a whole, created the unsettling impression of watching eyes and a mouth stretched too wide. The photograph's digital dissemination coincided with renewed interest in Appalachian history as scholars began examining the environmental and human cost of the region's industrial exploitation. The Blackwood story, with its themes of corporate negligence, family tragedy, and environmental revenge, resonated with contemporary discussions about the legacy of coal mining in Appalachia. In 2006, documentary filmmaker Maya Winters began production on The Watchers: Appalachia's Hidden History, focused on the Blackwood case and similar legends from the region. Her research team tracked down surviving members of families connected to the original incidents, including Laura Jenkins, great-granddaughter of Harriet Jenkins, who had spoken with Dr. Hayes in 1968. "Growing up, we knew certain parts of the mountain were off-limits," Laura told Winters in an interview conducted in her home in nearby Pineville. "Grandmother had a saying, 'The mountain gives and the mountain takes,' and sometimes the mountain watches to decide which it'll do." "When I was a child, I thought it was just one of those superstitious things old people say. But when I was 16, this would have been 2004 during that last 7-year mark, I was driving home from a friend's house after dark and saw a little girl in a white dress standing by the road near where the old Blackwood place used to be. I stopped, thinking she was lost, but when I got out of the car, I saw someone else standing behind her in the trees. Someone tall and wrong somehow, like their proportions didn't make sense." The girl pointed at them, then at me, like she was introducing us. I got back in my car so fast I nearly wrecked it getting out of there. The next day, I learned that a section of the old mine had collapsed that same night, right below where I'd seen the figures. Winters and her crew arrived in Harlan County in early April 2011, planning to film during the next predicted appearance window. They set up remote cameras at key locations, including the now barely visible foundation of the Blackwood cabin, Emma's place, and the mine entrance, which had been partially exposed by erosion over the decades. On the night of April 17th, the team positioned themselves in a research van parked at the nearest accessible road, monitoring the remote feeds. At approximately 11:30 p.m., they observed a temperature drop registered by their equipment, followed by electromagnetic disturbances similar to those recorded by Schaefer's team in 1976. The camera at Emma's place captured a brief image of what appeared to be a female figure in white before the feed was lost. When it resumed moments later, a tall, dark silhouette could be seen at the edge of the clearing. The proportions were disturbing. The figure appeared to be nearly 7 feet tall, with limbs that seemed too long and a torso that was impossibly narrow. Winters, determined to capture conclusive footage, made the fateful decision to approach the clearing with her cinematographer, Alex Rivera. They maintained radio contact with their producer, who remained with the equipment. "We're at the edge of the clearing now," Winters' final transmission stated. "The temperature is at least 20 degrees colder than it should be. There's something here with us. I can see it moving among the trees, and there's a sound like singing but coming from every direction at once. Wait, I can see the girl now. She's looking right at us. Behind her oh God, there's more than one of them. 3, maybe 4 tall figures. They're moving toward us, but wrong, like they're gliding instead of walking. Alex, are you getting this? Alex?" The audio dissolved into static. The producer, alarmed by the loss of contact, immediately called local authorities. By the time county sheriff's deputies reached the scene 2 hours later, there was no sign of Winters or Rivera. Their equipment was found scattered around the clearing, including Rivera's camera, which contained no footage from that night, despite having been activated according to the equipment logs. The disappearance of 2 professional filmmakers garnered national media attention, bringing the Blackwood case briefly into the mainstream. Search efforts were extensive, but yielded nothing beyond a single adult footprint found in the center of Emma's place. The same narrow, deep impression reported in multiple incidents over the decades. 5 days after the disappearance, as the search was scaling back, a local man reported seeing a woman matching Maya Winters' description walking along the road near the abandoned mine entrance at dawn. By the time authorities arrived, there was no one there, but they discovered Rivera's distinctive red bandana tied to a tree branch near the sealed entrance, along with a digital memory card placed carefully on a flat stone. The card contained a single audio file, time-stamped 3:17 a.m., on April 18th. In the recording, a voice identified by family members as Maya Winters can be heard speaking in a flat, affectless tone. The mountain remembers. The mountain has always remembered. What was taken from the earth returns to the earth. What was taken from the Blackwoods returns to the Blackwoods. The cycle is unbroken. The watchers are the witnesses. The girl is the guide. The passage opens every 7 years when the alignment is right. Some go willingly. Others are chosen. I have seen what lives within. I have seen what the mountain keeps. This will be my last communication from this side. Do not follow. The recording ends with what audio analysts described as multiple overlapping voices, singing what musicologists identified as fragments of Appalachian funeral dirges, some dating back to the early 19th century. Beneath these voices is a deeper sound, below the range of normal human hearing, but made visible on spectrograms, a rhythmic pulsation that acoustic experts likened to the breathing of something massive. Neither Maya Winters nor Alex Rivera has ever been found. In the years following their disappearance, the Blackwood case garnered attention from paranormal researchers and academics alike. Dr. Catherine Chen, Rebecca Chen's younger sister, took up her siblings' unfinished work, approaching the mystery with both scientific rigor and a personal determination to understand what happened to her sister. Whatever took Rebecca, whatever's been taking people from that mountain for generations, it operates on a pattern we can observe, even if we can't explain it, Dr. Chen stated in a 2017 interview. The 7-year cycle, the connection to the original Blackwood family, the consistent descriptions of the figures seen, these aren't random events. There's a logic to it, even if it's not a logic that fits neatly into our current understanding of reality. Chen's research focused on the geological peculiarities of the region, particularly the unusual mineral compositions found in samples taken from Emma's place. Analysis revealed trace elements typically found only in meteorites, suggesting that the area might have been an ancient impact site. More puzzling were the organic compounds present in the soil, complex carbon chains that didn't match any known biological source. There's something fundamentally different about that specific location, Chen explained. The boundary between what we consider solid matter and empty space behaves differently there. At a quantum level, particles in that area demonstrate entanglement patterns we've never seen before, almost as if they're connected to something else, something we can't detect with our current instruments. As April 2018 approached, the next 7-year mark since the Winters-Rivera disappearance, Chen assembled a small team of researchers equipped with the most advanced monitoring technology available. Unlike previous investigators, they established their observation posts at a safe distance, using drones and remote sensors to monitor the area without human presence. On April 17th, their instruments recorded now familiar patterns: temperature drops, electromagnetic anomalies, and seismic vibrations centered on Emma's place. Infrared cameras captured heat signatures consistent with human figures moving through the clearing, though visible light cameras showed nothing. Audio equipment picked up the same overlapping voices and subsonic pulsations documented in previous encounters. Most significantly, one drone flying over the area captured a brief but clear aerial image of the clearing at the height of the phenomenon. The photograph showed what appeared to be a distortion in the fabric of space itself, a vertical ripple in the air extending from the ground to approximately 7 feet high. Within this distortion, barely visible, were humanoid shapes that seemed to be passing through it, moving in both directions. Computer analysis of the image revealed another startling detail. On the ground around the distortion was a pattern of stones arranged in a perfect circle, identical to the formation described by Harriet Jenkins's father nearly a century earlier. And standing just outside this circle was the distinct heat signature of a child-sized figure, arms outstretched as if in welcome. The spring of 2025 marks 134 years since the Blackwood family posed for their fateful photograph. The clearing known as Emma's Place has been officially designated a restricted research area, monitored year-round by university equipment, but off-limits to casual visitors. The ruins of the Blackwood cabin have been preserved as a historical site, though few tourists venture that deep into the increasingly rewilded former mining region. What we know for certain about the Blackwood case remains limited. A family tragedy in 1891 somehow connected to a phenomenon that manifests in a 7-year cycle. documented disappearances spanning generations, all following similar patterns. Photographic evidence of something that shouldn't exist by conventional understanding. And beneath it all, the mountain itself, ancient, patient, perhaps not as inanimate as we prefer to believe. The original Blackwood photograph now resides in the Appalachian Cultural Heritage Museum in Lexington, preserved behind UV-protected glass and monitored by environmental controls. Visitors often report that the figure behind the family seems to be in a slightly different position depending on when they view it, though this is likely an optical illusion caused by lighting and perspective. More difficult to dismiss are the experiences reported by descendants of the Blackwood line, scattered now across America, but still connected by a shared history. Michael Caldwell, great-great-grandson of Thomas Blackwood, and the man who first shared the photograph online, described being woken in his Chicago apartment on the night of April 17, 2018, by what he initially thought was a child standing at the foot of his bed. It wasn't until she turned to look at me that I realized it was Emma, Caldwell recounted. Not some ghost or vision, but somehow Emma as she would have been had she grown up, a young woman now, around 19 or 20, still wearing that white dress. She didn't speak, just looked at me with such sadness in her eyes before pointing toward my window. Outside, on the fire escape, was one of the tall figures. It was watching me through the glass, and somehow I knew it had been watching my family for generations. Caldwell, unlike his ancestors, did not disappear. Instead, he began researching his family history more deeply, eventually connecting with Dr. Chen and contributing his DNA to a study examining genetic markers among Blackwood descendants. The results revealed a startling anomaly. All living Blackwoods carry a small but significant genetic sequence that doesn't match any known human population. More puzzling still, this sequence appears to be dormant in most family members, but becomes active in those who report encounters with the figures, as if something within them is being awakened by these experiences. "I don't believe the mountain is malevolent," Caldwell said in a recent interview. "Whatever happens there, whatever my ancestors encountered, it's part of a cycle much older than any of us. The tall figures, the watchers, they're not taking people randomly. They're calling back those who belong to them in some way, those who carry something of them already." This perspective is shared by Sarah Blackwood Jenkins, Emma's great-niece twice removed, who has spent decades collecting family stories and documenting encounters. Now, in her 70s, she serves as an unofficial historian of the case, maintaining correspondence with researchers and other Blackwood descendants worldwide. "Every family has its secrets," she wrote in her self-published memoir, "but the Blackwoods carry ours in our blood. The tall ones have always been with us, ever since William Blackwood made his bargain in 1823. They're not human. I don't think they ever were. But they're bound to us just as we're bound to them." Emma was the first to go willingly, I believe. She understood what the others didn't, that it wasn't about being taken, but about returning. As the next 7-year manifestation approaches in April 2025, preparations are already underway. Dr. Chen's team has installed a permanent research station near Emma's place, equipped with quantum sensors designed to measure disturbances in space-time itself. Government agencies, long skeptical of the case, have quietly assigned personnel to monitor the situation, concerned about the implications of the documented space-time distortions for national security. For the Blackwood descendants, the approaching date carries different significance. Several family members have reported dreams of Emma calling them to the mountain, while others have found themselves creating art depicting tall, elongated figures standing among trees, images they've never consciously seen, but somehow know intimately. The mountain waits, the cycle continues. And in an old photograph behind museum glass, a family stands frozen in time, unaware of the watching presence behind them that would shape their legacy for generations to come. A legacy written not just in historical records and academic papers, but in the very DNA of those who carry the Blackwood name. If you've watched this far, it's because you liked this story. Leave a comment saying, "I've watched this far," so I can get to know you and see who really enjoys the stories here on the channel. Please like this video if you felt that chill of recognition, that sense that perhaps your own family photographs might contain more than you've noticed. And if this story resonated with you, share it with someone who appreciates that history is often stranger and more mysterious than we care to admit. The mountain remembers. The mountain watches. And sometimes, if you look closely enough at old photographs, you might catch a glimpse of what's been watching you all along. The story of the Blackwood family and the mysterious figure in their portrait remains one of the most compelling cases in the annals of Appalachian folklore. It reminds us that beneath the surface of documented history lie older truths, truths embedded in the land itself, in the mountains that have witnessed countless human lives unfold and end beneath their ancient shadows. What makes this case so enduring is not just its supernatural elements, but how it intertwines with the very real human tragedy of Appalachian mining communities. The exploitation of both people and land, the corporate negligence that claimed so many lives, the poverty that forced families like the Blackwoods to send their men into the earth day after day. These documented historical realities provide the foundation upon which the more inexplicable aspects of the story rest. Perhaps that's why the tall figures, the Watchers, continue to haunt our imagination. They stand at the boundary between what we can explain and what we cannot, between the tangible suffering of people forgotten by mainstream history and the intangible presence of something that has always existed beyond our understanding. The mountain remembers, even when human records fail. The mountain watches, even when human attention turns elsewhere. And sometimes, just sometimes, the mountain reveals glimpses of what it has kept hidden, whether in the form of a strange figure in a family portrait or in the genetic code of descendants who carry within them secrets older than they know. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel. Subscribe now to continue exploring the hidden histories that lie just beneath the surface of the world we think we know. If you've watched this far, it's because you liked this story. Leave a comment saying, "I've watched this far," so I can get to know you and see who really enjoys the stories here on the channel. And if you found value in this journey into Appalachia's shadows, please like and share this video with others who appreciate that the most compelling mysteries are often those closest to home.